Hey all, Avros here, back with the next fight, which is the Lufenia as part of the Invaders from Distant Sea event running at the moment. This event has us fighting against Gilgamesh, but he doesn't show up in the Lufenia fight at all. This is up against two Ram Requin, I guess is how it's pronounced, not entirely sure on the name there. These bosses appear to be very threatening at first glance until you kind of look at exactly how their attacks work, either on something like the Dissidia Compendium or on the Tonberry Troops website there where they've done their research as well. And then you find that there's a very specific counter for this fight that functions extremely well. So before we cover what that is, we'll talk about what the bosses do first, and then we can talk about neutering their effectiveness there. So these bosses have a Lufenia Orb that appears at the quest start and disappears about 49% HP, and then does not come back for the rest of the fight, so you only have to deal with it until that time, and then you're clear for basically the second half of the fight there. The orb is increased via launch, and this will increase it by 10 only on the boss that is launched. So whenever you start a chase sequence, that will increase the orb. They also have the ability to ignore Brave and HP damage reductions on one of their attacks. If they break your party and get enough Brave, they will do a plus version of the attack, and that will cause them to get that bravery and HP damage reduction effect. And all attacks they do are safely able to be handled in this encounter, as they're all brave damage only. So nothing to worry about there, that will just do brave damage, you don't have to worry about them hitting your party with full HP. And once you sort of realize that, you might have put together who the character is that deals with this fight very easily is, but we'll cover that in just a second. The other thing that you need to worry about with these bosses is at 79, 49, and 29% HP, they gain a 99% HP damage reduction effect until you deal 150,000 damage via a launch to the boss that has been enabled with that effect of that HP threshold. So this means if it occurs on both of them at the same time, both need to be launched and that amount of damage dealt to nullify the effect, because it's separate on each boss. So with that all covered, let's talk about reducing the danger of this fight down to nothing. So you can effectively make this fight not able to deal any damage to you whatsoever and reduce your chance of death to nothing. So this is done by bringing along Galuf to this encounter. So as long as you bring along some decent damage dealers with Galuf, bring along someone with launch deal with the Lufenia Orb, someone who increases HP damage isn't a bad option as well, or someone with very high damage dealing, and you can make sure to get through that 150k launch, like I said, to get rid of the damage reduction threshold, then you're fine, because all of the attacks that these bosses do that do any HP damage are single target and physical. So Galuf can cover the entire party, jump in front of anyone that's being targeted, dodge the attack, and no HP damage will be done basically for the entire encounter. So along with the very generous 110 turn count for this Lufenia, which is very generous for a Lufenia fight, you can basically bring any launcher you want to cover that orb, as long as they can make that 150k damage happen, and you can just sort of plug away at this fight, get it all done, and you'll be all good, as long as you bring Galuf along to deal with those HP attacks. And that's the strategy I went with for this fight. So to go in more in depth into how I handled this, at quest start I basically dealt with the fight by having Galuf doing his counters, Bartz was doing battery, Layle doing his launches to keep the Lufenia orbs up at the max as high as I could, up at the 20, and then did that basically through until the first HP damage reduction happened on both bosses at the 79% HP threshold. Layle, of course, an excellent launcher for any party in this encounter, as he does have with his new LD the ability to make any launches he does always followed up by both of your party members, regardless of where they are in the turn order, which is fantastic. And Bartz bringing along his battery and his HP damage increase with his BT effect later in the fight made sure that 150k damage was always being dealt. So once the first damage reduction had occurred and both were launched to break the effect, I used Bart's burst phase and made sure to use Fujin's LD call first, but did use his burst phase there. After the full burst phase had been done, both sharks were dropped by about 10 to 12% HP, and then I went about stacking Bart's BT effect as fast as I could to get that extra damage up, and then dropping the sharks down to the next damage reduction threshold at 49% HP. Did this via using launches and continuing to count on whenever they did have a turn with Galuf, and then the Wind Enchant from Fujin, as well as the Imperil Aura from Bartz, made sure everyone was dealing lots of damage and got them down to that very quickly. So once the damage reduction debuff had been cleared at 49% HP, I called in my heavy hitter big damage dealer for this fight, which was a friend Tifa unit, and switched out Galuf for this and used Summon. This was to make sure that Tifa's turns were all used up as quickly as possible, especially under Summon, so the bosses couldn't get a turn, so Tifa could switch back out for Galuf before the bosses had much chance to do any HP damage to me. And along with her Meteor Crusher and Layle's Field Burst effect, I was able to basically knock the first boss that was hit by that down to the next HP damage reduction on the first hit, and then used Layle to launch it and broke it through that damage reduction effect immediately. And then for the second boss, had a bit of trouble getting it down low enough. I didn't get enough damage to it under Summon, so I had to launch it outside of Summon to get the 150k damage, which you'll notice when it gets to that part of the fight, there was a couple of turns there where it was a bit iffy on how the whole fight was going to go at that point. I did as well have to use Layle's LD call he had, because I had him with Ceodore, just to make sure there was enough bravery damage dealt, and had it there in my back pocket as a heal if I needed it, if anyone did take HP damage. Luckily I didn't have to use that for that fact. But getting the boss's bravery down, that was very high bravery at that time, low enough to make sure that when Layle used his next attack it would break it, so that Galuf had enough time to get back into the fight, was a clutch sort of moment I had for it there, and that was very useful for that. Once Tifa was over and Galuf had come back in, both the bosses were under 10% HP, so it was just a matter of cleaning them up and ending the fight without too much trouble. This came in well under the 110 turn count at about 45 turns, so this fight shouldn't cause too much trouble for anyone with some good launches and Galuf, but if you do want to discuss any sort of other options, changes to the party or anything like that, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and thank you for watching and enjoy the rest of the video. とっておきじゃ。さらばじゃ。成敗。やらせんぞ。助け合いだ。やらせんぞ。受けてみよう。速攻だ。よし。
れならとどめ。おりゃ
助け合いだ。
足も行くぞ。ぶっ飛べ。
助け合いだ。
足も行くぞ。オーケー。
助け合いだ。
足も行くぞ。成敗。おい、やらせんぞ。やらせんぞ。
すりつぶしてあげる。あっ、覚悟はいい。手加減なし。どきなさい。あー、いけ。
任せろ。
助け合いだ。
ぶっ飛べ。
私だって。助け合いだ。手加減なし。どきなさい。あー、いけ。
行くぜ。
助け合いだ。私だって。
成敗。
私だって。叩き込む。痛いわよ。
この地にかけて。はあ、思いを込めて貫く。速攻だ。よーし、これならとどめ。おりゃ
私だって。助け合いだ。手加減なし。どきなさい。あー、いけ。 から俺は本気だよ。
退社するぞい。かかってこい。くらえ。やらせんぞ。と成敗。やらせんぞ。おい。行くぜ。
助け合いだ。
足も行くぞ。やらせんぞ。やらせんぞ。慈悲などないぞ。これがサザン。とっておきじゃ。さらばじゃ。やらせんぞ。せんぞ。ぶっ飛べ。足も行くぞ。
助け合いだ。
まだまだ俺には勝てねえよ。